Senator Alexander has probably made the decisions that he thought were right for the country and then govern the country. That's not his job. His job is to support and defend and uphold the United States Constitution. So, what we're looking, and I think we're going to see this in the future more and more, we're really looking at two political philosophies. Are we going to have arbitrary government that does whatever it wants, or are we going to have a government which is constrained by the Constitution, which is what I think we should have? My story reminds me a lot of Steve's as far as how I sort of became politically aware and politically active. I was always interested in politics. I mean, I got good grades in my high school history and civics classes and all that stuff, right? Then I got out in the real world and I'm like, it doesn't really work like that at all. One thing I discovered is when I started working, I had to pay taxes. And it seemed like the better I would do, the more I would pay in taxes. And I just kept on paying more and more and more and more in taxes. I'm going, wait a second, I'm paying you guys, the government, all this. I get that. That's it. So along the way, I started studying economics, and economics became my passion. It's gotten terrible though at this point. I'm a television star, right? I'm like this larger-than-life personality. Some would even argue I'm sort of a pop culture icon. So you can imagine how embarrassing it is for me when I do an interview on the radio and the guy's like, "What does a guy like you do in your free time?" And I go, "Study economics." But it gets worse. I've been very fortunate. I've been all around the world. I've performed in front of literally millions of people. I've been in movies. I've been on TV shows. I've worked with some of the greatest entertainers in the entire world. But when they ask me, what's the coolest thing you've ever done? I say, I once cracked open Economics No Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. Yes. It gets bad. But economics really is my passion, but I'm not talking about what most people refer to when they talk about economics. I'm talking about Austrian economics. How many of you are familiar with that term? Okay, I don't have to explain myself. This is great. As you know, there are essentially two, well, there's more than two. But what we're fighting, really, is the Keynesian economic paradigm. The Keynesian economic paradigm relies on numbers, models, formula to tell us what's going to happen in the economy. Well, there's just one big problem with that. Economics is not the study of numbers, models, or formula. It's a study of what people do. And people have free will and are unpredictable. So you actually can't plug variables into a formula and determine what is going to happen in the economy. I was going to defer all the questions about Austrian economics to Bob Murphy, but he left. So I guess he's really me. Thanks, Bob. But I'd just like to quickly talk about a couple differences between Austrian economics and Keynesian economics. The first one is that Austrian economics is actually the study of human action. It is not the study of numbers, because that works really well in a laboratory, but it has no application to the real world. Austrian economics is a descriptive science. In other words, it tells us what's going on. It describes things. It's just like studying the weather is a descriptive science, but we can't control the weather, which would be prescriptive, okay? So the reason that academics and politicians like Keynesian economics is because it gives them, supposedly, the ability to control the economy. If we do this, this is what's going to happen. It gives the academics a lot of power and prestige because they become magicians, basically, and they become advisors to the king, and it gives the politicians a lot of power as well because they're the people that regulate the economy. So it's a descriptive and not a prescriptive science. As many of you may know, I challenged Lieutenant Governor Ron Ramsey to a debate about the unit fare tax. I haven't heard anything back from him, and I don't really expect to at this point. And the reason is because he doesn't have anything to gain by it. It's a no-win for him. And he would lose in the debate anyway because he's absolutely wrong. One thing that all these guys are saying is that this is not a new tax. It is a new tax. I'm going to explain why. Sort of have to understand how sales tax works. There are two complementary taxes, actually. You have sales tax and you have something called a use tax. So if you buy a product in the state of Tennessee and you're a Tennessee resident, you're going to pay sales tax on it. If you are resident in Tennessee and you buy something from out of state, you're not going to pay sales tax on it. Because in 1992 decision by the Supreme Court, which is Quill Corporation versus North Dakota, says that the states can't force a retailer in another state to put sales tax on their behalf unless that retailer has what they call a physical nexus in their state. So if you buy something from out of state, you don't pay sales tax on it, but if you bring it back to Tennessee, you're supposed to pay something that's called a use tax. You're supposed to remit that tax back to the government. Well, probably one bad thing that we've done with this whole internet sales tax deal is a lot more people know about use tax now, because almost no one knew about the use tax, right? So no one paid it because no one knew. And it's on you to pay it. It's not on the retailer to collect it. So why this is a new tax is it takes the use tax and changes the point of collection, okay? If you buy something out of state now, under the internet sales tax, the retailer is now obligated and has a responsibility to collect the tax, which they don't currently have, okay? So the point of collection of the tax changes, which in my estimation would make it a new tax. Also the fact that they're now enforcing the tax, which they weren't doing before. They were relying on you to enforce yourself. So that would be like, you know, if, say, the government said, well, we're gonna outlaw green cars, but then they never enforce it and everybody forgets about it, and then all of a sudden they turn around and start ticketing people for having green cars. Well, you know, we can argue semantically whether it's a new tax or not, but the impact is that it's going to be a new tax. Another problem with the internet sales tax mandate is it's going to put an enormous burden on small internet retailers. There are 9,600 unique tax jurisdictions across the United States. According to the Marketplace Fairness Act, what happened is the states that want to participate in this have to sign up with this organization and agree to simplify their rules. So in that respect, you're only going to, I guess, be subject to however many states sign up. I think 46 states have sales tax at the moment. Nevertheless, you're going to have to calculate 9,600 different tax rates, as well as you're going to be subject to audits and questions from all the various states. So if you're a retailer in Tennessee, all of a sudden you're dealing with the tax authorities in California. Now, the thing about that is, for a big company like Amazon, that's really not that big a deal. They've already got armies of tax lawyers and advisors. But if you're a small business and you're operating on a very thin profit margin, that becomes very difficult. I saw one business owner that was quoted as saying he thought his first year compliance costs for the Marketplace Fairness Act, if it passes, and we should note that this is passed the Senate, it's sort of stalled in the House, and the state legislature actually has to okay it too. So hopefully there's there's some buffers before this is going to happen, but it's been something that they've been pushing now for a number of years. But in any case, if you're a small business, the compliance costs are going to be through the roof. This gentleman says it's going to cost him $40,000 a year for the first year to comply, $4,000 a year after that. When your profit margin is very low, that eats the entire thing up. And then also, of course, it transfers the money to the government. You can't invest in your business anymore, so you can't build your business. As I mentioned, the political implications are terrible as well, because if I'm a Tennessee business, Tennessee resident, all all of a sudden, I have to answer to the authorities in California. Well, doesn't that sort of undermine state sovereignty? Because shouldn't the state of Tennessee be sovereign over what happens here, as opposed to our folks answering to tax collectors from another state? And that's an argument that's been made, is that this actually strengthens states' rights, because the states can, make a law and enforce it in another state. Well, I mean, what's going to happen next? If France decides that they're going to have sales tax, all of a sudden we're going to have to answer to the French? So it undermines states' rights. It does not strengthen states' rights, as well as it creates an environment of taxation without representation, because if I'm a resident and business person in Tennessee, I have very little ability to affect policy in California. There are also a couple other things that I haven't really talked about in any articles yet that I see could be potentially very serious problems. One of them is the fact that this is going to lead to a national retail sales tax. All right, it's going to be extremely hard to comply with on both ends. If you're a business person, like I said, you're going to be dealing with all these different states and all these different localities. You're going to have a hard time doing that. The tax collectors are also going to have a hard time collecting this tax. So what's going to happen? Everybody's going to turn to the federal government and say, man, we're having such a hard time collecting this. Why don't we just remit the tax to you, and then you can remit it back to the states? So that's one thing that's going to happen, could potentially happen. Another thing which I find quite problematic is if you actually look at the language of the Marketplace Fairness Act, it doesn't talk about the internet. It talks about retail sellers. There was a case in the Northeast, Town Fair Tire versus Massachusetts. Town Fair Tire is a tire retailer that has locations all through New England. And they have locations in Massachusetts. So they actually have a physical nexus in Massachusetts. New Hampshire has no sales tax. What was happening, and I actually had a place in New Hampshire, so I'm aware of what people do. I think Massachusetts sales tax was 5%. So people were driving up from Massachusetts to New Hampshire to buy tires. Well, the state of Massachusetts said, Town Fair Tires, you guys know that our residents are coming to New Hampshire to collect sales tax. So why aren't you guys, to buy tires, I'm sorry, thank you. So aren't you guys collecting sales tax? Luckily, that was thrown out of court. But the reason that they ruled in favor of Town Fair Tires and against Massachusetts was the fact that they couldn't prove that the tires were being consumed in Massachusetts. Not that Massachusetts did not have a right to try to get, the money out of Town Fair Tires. So you can see where this all leads, right? If you're a physical location, if you're a brick and mortar retailer, if we go into Kentucky now, are we going to have to supply our driver's license to prove where we're from? The brick and mortar retailers should be against this as well, because it's going to place a huge burden on them in that way. I mean, if they have to figure out where everybody's from and they have to collect different tax rates for all these different people, which is just fair. I mean, we're talking about the Marketplace Fairness Act, right? If they have to do it, it's going to place an enormous burden on them, as well as, one of the things that bothers me about this too is I'm sort of I like that privacy thing, right? Well, they're going to be putting all this into logs. They're going to be writing all of it down. It's the same with the internet deal. There's going to be more and more of a paper trail as we move forward. So, in that respect, again, this that there are some things that are sort of under the radar, which I find very problematic. Is this going to help the state raise revenue? No. One of the study that's quoted the most is from Bill Fox, who's an economist at the University of Tennessee, and Fox estimates that this is going to generate, at least this is what the number Ron Ramsey quotes, over $700 million a year for the state of Tennessee. Well, there's a bit of a problem with that. I've actually looked at this study, and from everything that I can gather, what Fox did is he went around to the states and just said, hey, how much internet sales have you guys done over the past several years? And basically he did a linear extrapolation saying, okay, this is what's going to happen. If sales trend like this and we collect this is how much you're going to get. Well, the problem with that is he's looking at it from a Keynesian perspective. What are people going to do if you start taxing the internet? They're going to start buying less stuff, right? Yeah. He's making an assumption. Let me tell you a joke about economists and their assumptions. It's the old deserted island, right? An engineer, a chemist, and an economist end up on a deserted island. Don't have any food. And one day, and they don't have a can opener. Anyway, so one day, a can of pork and beans washes up. And that's really great, except they don't have a can opener, so they're trying to figure out how to open a can of pork and beans. Well, the chemist is like, well, all we have to do is we just have to heat the fire up to such and such temperature at the boiling point of pork and beans, and the can will explode and we'll get our pork and beans. Well, the engineer starts designing a Rube Goldberg machine. That's the better mousetrap, right? Or he got all this stuff. Anyway, he figures he can drop a rock from high distance, hit the can, the pork and beans, pull it out. Well, the economist is just sitting there. He's like, I fail to see a problem. Why is that? He's like, we'll just assume we have a can opener. And that's the problem. Is they're making these assumptions, based on what's happened in the past, that if you tax the internet, it's not going to have any effects moving forward, and it will. And finally, for folks like us, we've always got to oppose taxes, right? Any tax increase. Not that long ago, I was doing an interview about this on the radio, and a caller calls in and he's like, I am so tired of you people complaining about taxes. The economy's doing just fine. Just shut up and pay your taxes. And I'm just like, oh, wow. That's an unfortunate attitude because of the way the taxes are collected. The inscription on the IRS building is from Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, and it says that taxes are the price that we pay for civilization. Well, taxes are collected essentially at the point of a gun. So what he's or a club. So what he's really saying is civilization relies on clubs. We rely on clubs to be civilized, and that's not true. We should always oppose taxes all the time. When people ask me what tax I'm in support of, I'm not in support of any taxes because the government's always going to be taxing us, and they're always going to be getting their money. So those of us who oppose taxes, let's sort of go the other way, and let's not give them any fodder. I don't. One of the things we talk about is this idea that this tax is going to be revenue neutral. When has that ever happened? When have they ever created one tax to replace it with another tax? I don't know if that's ever happened in the history of the world. Probably has, but nevertheless, we're going to see our taxes go up, and that's a bad thing. And that's the last point that I'd like to make about this. No matter anything you might say, no matter what you call it, no matter what the economic impact is, the bottom line is that people are going to be paying more taxes, and that should be happening. So, thank you guys very much. You got any questions?
Everything you said is true. You missed the most important, and it is internet sales tax are unconstitutional. Article 1, Section 9, the very 5th paragraph, those of you who have your small constitutions with you, say no tax shall be laid on any article exported from any state. Period. It's unconstitutional. I got that, there's a big note, I got it to the, 3 different people in Alexander's office and on that is. But it's there, folks. If you make it in Tennessee, you can tax it. If you leave Tennessee and goes to Kentucky, it's unconstitutional to put a tax on it. It is just that plain.
Well, and, you know, the original intent of the Commerce Clause was to, you know, inhibit the state's abilities, or prohibit them from taxing. Not, and this is what this is all going to be turned around to, is, well, we had this power under the Commerce Clause. Well, when the Commerce Clause was written, regulate meant to mean regular, which meant flowed like it should without taxes. So what they're going to do, and I agree with you, and if they were actually, the Commerce Clause is probably one of the most maligned clauses in the Constitution, because they've used it to just blow everything open at this point. One of the worst Supreme Court decisions ever made, I think it was made in 1942, is Filburn versus Wicker. And this guy Filburn, Roscoe Filburn, was growing wheat in Ohio, and he was consuming the excess himself. It all stayed on his farm. But at the time, they were trying to raise the price of wheat, so they had quotas for how much wheat they could grow. Well, they turned around and said, well, yeah, you're right, you know, you're consuming the wheat on your own farm, so you're right in that respect. However, because you aren't going out in the market and buying wheat, it affects the price of wheat. Therefore, it's subject to the Interstate Commerce Clause and regulation by Congress, and they lost the case. So what they've done, you know, they've just taken it now, and if they can say that you grow something on your own farm, you consume it yourself, and it never leaves the farm, but we can regulate that under the Interstate Commerce Clause, they can regulate that.
No, because it's interstate.
Yeah, well, no, yeah, you're right, except tell them that.
That's why you need more guys like me in Congress.
Yeah, you're right.
What is it about economics that really tickles your brain? What made you look at it and go, I need more of this?
It helps me understand the way the world works. And at this point, I actually look at everything through the prism of economics, of Austrian economics. What we're really looking at with economics is how people satisfy their wants, needs, and desires in a world of scarce resources. Okay, I mean, that's how I define it anyway. There is one resource that all of us must utilize all the time, and it's still a scarce resource, and that's our time. So everything that we do is an economic decision, because we're deciding how am I going to utilize my time. None of us are on this planet forever. None of us can be in more than one place for once. Most of us can't multitask. I know I can't. So we can't do more than one thing at once. So everything, you know, really comes down to economics, and that really is how I view the world now, is through that prism. Another thing that I should know about Austrian economics that differentiates it from Keynesian economics is the way that Austrians view money. And there's another school of economics called monetarism. The monetarists are really great. Milton Friedman was a monetarist economist, but monetarists still believe that money should be controlled by the government, basically, or some sort of central authority. As he moved through life, Friedman started to think a little bit differently. But in any case, the Austrians believe that just like every other commodity, and money really is the most important commodity in an economy, and the Austrians believe for that reason that money should be regulated by the market and supplied by the market as well. But the reason, that's what really, once I made that connection, that it's everything, it's all economics, that really got me into it.
My question is, I assume, because of your Austrian viewpoint, that you're probably not a huge fan of the Federal Reserve System. There's a problem, there's a lot of different schools of thought as how to unwind that system. Once we get a certain number of legislators who feel that way, who are ready to make a move on that,
Yeah.
whether it be competition in currency, whether it be taken to a gold standard, et cetera. What do you think is the way to get out of the Federal Reserve and get out of the dollar before it crashes on us and destroys the economy? decade.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because another thing, difference that once I discovered Austrian economics, I started to realize is that as bad as the income tax is, and as bad as any tax is, and certainly some taxes are much more egregious than others, it really doesn't matter what the taxation system is as long as the government can just go out and print the money. And inflation, of course, is a tax as well, and I consider it the most insidious of all taxes because, we hate income tax because it's a direct tax. We can look at it and see, I'm paying this. We can look at the various taxes, property tax, sales tax, and we can actually see it's right there. But with inflation, we have, most folks anyway, I think John Maynard Keynes said that only 1 in a million people will understand what happens with inflation. So we don't understand, not we, but the common person out there, and I'm certainly don't mean to denigrate them, they just don't have the knowledge. We don't understand why 20 years ago, this cost 25 cents and now it costs $2. And the reason is because of inflation. It's a tax. That I think is the overriding issue and the most important issue that the United States and in fact the entire world is going to face going forward, because it's just not the US. The entire world is on a fiat currency standard. Everybody's printing money, everybody's causing massive amounts of inflation, distortions in the market, and when this thing crashes, it is not going to just be the United States, it's in the entire world, and that's never, ever in the history of the world happened before, that there was nothing backing anybody's money. Okay, so it's a very, very dangerous time. For me, what I think should happen is we need to audit the Federal Reserve. There needs to be an actual audit. Currently, the two most important things that the Fed does can't be audited by statute. The actions of the Federal Open Market Committee, who are the guys that go out and do the purchases for the Fed. They buy, at this point they buy whatever they want to buy. But anyway, that can't be audited. So we don't know really what the Fed is doing in that respect. And the other fact is that the transactions the Fed has with foreign central banks and foreign countries can't be audited. In 2007, 2008, the Fed lent out $17 trillion. I would venture to guess that no one in this room received any of that $17 trillion. The big banks did, and also foreign countries and foreign central banks did. I think that if American people actually understood the monetary system and understood who benefits from it, and it's not them, it's their crony buddies on Wall Street, that they would demand change. We need to take laws like legal tender laws, as well as the sales tax on gold and silver, and get rid of those and allow gold and silver to compete with the fiat currency again. And then what's going to happen is a couple things. Either the Fed's going to have to get honest because you're going to have real money, or when this whole thing does crash, people will recognize that gold and silver are real money, which according to the Constitution is what, the Constitution says. It doesn't say, it drives me nuts. Sorry guys.
Go for it.
Ben Bernanke's on 60 Minutes, and he admits it. He says the Fed creates money. If you read the Constitution, it doesn't talk about creating money, it talks about coining money. That means the money already exists. They're just putting it into a coin form, so that it has a stamp of the government approval, so that people accept it and commerce can flow freely. It doesn't say anything about creating money. When they're talking about regulating the value of foreign commerce, they're just talking about, making sure that a Spanish dollar weighs what a Spanish dollar is supposed to weigh. They're not talking about, we're going to print all this money and make the Spanish dollar worth this much, And then if you look at things like the Currency Act, it specifically defines the dollar as, as an amount of gold or silver.
72 was $32.
Yeah. So, gold and silver are real money. And if we would just, and I'm certainly not, F.A. Hayek, who won a Nobel Prize in economics and is Austrian economist, that's what he talked about, is just allowing competing currencies. And we see, with Bitcoin now. I'm not a big fan of Bitcoin, but we're seeing it, and what happens? They're going to crush it because they know that do you guys know the story of Bernard von Nauthaus?
Oh, yeah.
The $30? Mr. von Nauthaus, and I actually think he made some mistakes because he was selling silver rounds, and where I think he made a mistake was he put a dollar price on them instead of just saying it was an ounce of silver. So they charged him with counterfeiting and threw him in jail. The thing was though that you can see, like I said, I don't really think that was his intent. I think what he was trying to do is he was trying to do the public a great service by trying to reintroduce silver as money. I think he made a mistake in that respect. However, what the prosecuting attorney said, what the federal prosecutor said in this case is chilling. And the judge, to his credit, struck it from the record. But the prosecuting attorney said this was an act of domestic terrorism because he was trying to undermine the monetary system. That tells you how serious they are about competing currencies. So please turn that off because I may be going to jail about what I just said. But we talk about abolishing the Fed. We don't need to abolish the Fed. We just need to replace the Fed. And actually, we just need to allow the Fed to be subjected to market forces. If that happens, this thing, it's going to be a rough ride. In 2007, 2008, they should have just let everything collapse. If they would have done that, all these distortions and malinvestments and misallocations of resources would have been, the market would have purged them. We'd have had a year, 18 months, really bad times, but we would be on a strong growth trajectory right now. Instead, the too big to fails are bigger than ever. The crony capitalist system is worse than it's ever been. And I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware of this. In 1920, the United States had a horrible, horrible, horrible recession. The drop-off in economic activity was actually worse than 1929. Warren G. Harding was president in 1920. No one ever hears about Warren G. Harding because he didn't do anything. He was laissez-faire. He said, let it go. The market will purge itself. He actually cut government spending. He let everything collapse. There was an 18-month depression. At that time, they called it, it's another thing. They keep on changing the terms that they use. But anyway, it might have been called a panic. Anyway, there was 18 months of really bad times. Then everything took off. In 1929, Herbert Hoover, who in our history books is supposed to be this laissez-faire guy, he wasn't. He did all sorts of things to interfere with the economy. That's what caused the Great Depression, because he never allowed things to bottom. And then FDR came in, of course, and just, FDR actually in 32 ran on a Hoover is a big government interventionist and we need to get rid of him platform. He did. And then of course the New Deal, and FDR's advisors will say this, the New Deal actually just took what Hoover was doing and essentially put it on steroids. That's what they did in 2008. If they had just said, it would have been quite painful, and real leadership, real political leadership would have said, guys, things are really messed up, and we're going to have a bad time, but we're going to get through it. And when we get through to the other side, we're going to have strong growth, and the economy is going to be back on sound footing, and we're going to take off. Now we have a zombie economy that's propped up by $85 billion a month coming from the Federal Reserve. That's the only thing propping it up. Last night, Kevin, Matt, and I, see you guys, went and saw Steve Moore, who I really like. He's an editorialist for the Wall Street Journal, but he was talking about how, if we could just get back to 5% growth, cut taxes, get back to 5-6% for growth, you can eliminate the deficit. I'm like, how can you get back to 5 or 6% growth when we only have 2% growth with the Fed pumping $1 trillion a year? Unfortunately, it's not going to happen. What needs to happen is the government gets out of the way, and we need to have this purging, and you need to have political leaders who can explain to people what's happening, why it needs to happen, and that things are going to be okay and they're going to be much better in the end.
Why do you say that we can't audit the Feds?
It's statutorily prohibited. The Fed is audited. And I've seen this argument, the people like I that talk about me and Kevin and a lot of you guys that talk about auditing the Fed. You guys are conspiracy theorists because the Fed is audited. It is, except for the important stuff that it does. That's why I say that it's not audited. Yeah, it's prohibited by statute from certain things being audited. And those, in my opinion, are the most important things that it does.
Because people know that that's not even a government.
Yeah.
Could you address the fact that we're monetizing our debt, and the implications are for our economy?
Oh, yeah.
In that respect?
Yeah, what's happening, just to cut to the chase, this is extremely bad. The Federal Reserve is just essentially printing money to buy government debt. So they're printing, they're borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, but by doing that, the money supply keeps on getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The national debt keeps on getting bigger. That's another thing. All this noise that we're hearing about interest rates going up, about the Federal Reserve has a program called QE, which basically means they're just printing money. And what they do is they jawbone and say, okay, we're going to end this pretty soon. The reason they're doing that is because they're trying to keep inflation expectations low, because if everybody knows that they're printing money, inflation expectations kick up and they're getting out of control at some point. They can never allow interest rates to go back up, because if they do, we will be in a deficit death spiral. In the 1980s, the late 1970s, early 1980s, for those of you who remember this, the economy is terrible in the 1970s. Inflation is very high. We just gone off the remnants of a gold standard, and that allowed the government to just print willy-nilly, which they were doing. They were funding not only LBJ's Great Society, but also the Vietnam War, and they were doing that by printing money. So Nixon realized at that time nations could still come in, and the dollar was backed by gold as far as foreign nations come in and get their gold back. Well, Nixon's advisors is like, tricky dick. We got a big problem here. We're going to run out of gold pretty soon if we keep on going like this, because France and some other nations figured out what's going on. So Nixon closed the gold window. He said foreign currencies are no longer redeemable in gold. And that caused an incredible spike in inflation after a few years. What happened with Paul Volcker is Paul Volcker came in, and lucky he also had Ronald Reagan's fiscal policies, cutting taxes, but Volcker came in and jacked interest rates up to 20% and got the inflation out of the economy and did what I'm talking about. He was able to sort of cause everything to collapse, and along with Reagan's stimulative fiscal policies, the economy took off in the 80s. They can't do that now, because if interest rates go back up to where they normally are at 5%, all of a sudden we're paying over $1 trillion, I don't know the exact number, you're paying like $800 billion more a year into the deficit in interest. So it's impossible. They can't allow interest rates to go back up. So that's why they're doing it. They have to keep interest. We're walking this tightrope right now. On one side we have a deflationary depression. On the other side, we have a hyperinflationary depression. And we're walking a tightrope between the two. And the Fed is like on this tightrope in a hurricane, blowing on both sides. And we were talking today with a gentleman who really knows his economics. And actually, Ben Bernanke's been masterful, because he's been able to get us this far. But at some point, I'm not a Bernanke fan, because what he's doing is actually hurting things worse. But at some point, it's just unsustainable. And yeah, what they're doing is they're just printing money to buy the debt, and that's going to have horrendous implications for the future.